We'll now take a look in more detail at some of the settings behind the tools. To get to the settings behind the tools, we need to double click on their icon in the toolbox. The arrow tool and the marquee tool don't have settings behind them, but every other tool, if you double click, you'll get some sort of dialog box. So if I double click on the slab tool, we see the slab settings, and at the top it tells me I'm changing the default settings. I don't have anything selected, which is important to distinguish. All the 3D tools follow a similar sort of pattern. There'll be an area where we set the geometry and positioning. So in the case of the slab, we have the thickness, and then the position of the top surface relative to either the current story or the project 0. We have the story it belongs to, and then we have the floor plan and section settings, so what its appearance is in 2D effectively. Then there's the model tab where we set the 3D appearance and settings, and then we have listing and labelling and tags and categories for more advanced settings. At the very bottom there's an option to change layer as well. If I hit OK, I'm then ready to draw. And a little bit like the wall tool, there are geometry settings that allow us to change between a polygon, a rectangle and an angled rectangle. So I'll begin by just drawing a rectangle, and in here we can type in our sizes. So let's make this 12 meters by 9 meters, and that draws a rectangle. The shape can be changed. If I select it, all I've done is shift click. We can then pick on an edge, and we're given what's called a pet palette, and this has a number of settings. The ones across the top allow me to modify the shape. The ones at the bottom are the edit commands, so drag, rotate, mirror, elevate and multiply. If you rest the mouse over any of them, it will give you information on a tooltip to tell you what that particular function is. So in this case, what I want to do is just add to polygon, and all I'm going to do is change the geometry to an angled rectangle this time, and what we'll have is, let's say, another 12 meters at 22.5 degrees, and we'll also make this 9 meters wide. So we now have a completely different shape, footprint, floor slab for the building. I can then add again, back to a rectangle, and this time what I want to do is mention these guidelines earlier. If I put the mouse on this point and press Q, I can create an X-axis guideline, which means when I draw this shape, it's going to snap onto the existing boundary. I'll make this 6 meters wide. The depth doesn't matter because it's snapped onto the existing geometry. So this is the basic shape that I want to create. And even at this stage, although this is 2D, there are already other settings behind it. So what I want to do is have a look at 3D, and we can look at navigation in there. The most effective way to get to 3D, personally, that I find, rather than using buttons, shortcuts, views, etc., is just to press a key on the keyboard. And the key you would expect to be F3, but actually on a Mac it's F4 and on a PC it's F5. This gives us additional settings which are more useful than F3. So if I, because it's Windows, press F5, the 3D window appears and we can see the geometry. Like the 2D window, I can pan just by holding down the wheel of the mouse. I can zoom in or out by either just rolling the mouse wheel, and I can double click and that does a fit in window. Zoom far away, double click, that fits to the window. In addition to this though, because I'm in the 3D window, if I press and hold down shift and then press and hold down the wheel of the mouse, I can also orbit, so we can see that this shape is actually a three-dimensional shape and it's got parameters already assigned to it, so we know its colours and materials, etc. To go back to 2D, all I'm going to do is press F2 and that drops me back to the previous plan window. If I now double click on the wall tool, this takes me into the wall settings, and here we can set, similar to the other dialogue, geometry and positioning. So the height of the wall in this case is positioned relative to the stories, its home story. Because it's a wall, it's got additional settings here to do with alignments, etc., thicknesses, offsets. I'm going to stick with it just as standard, and then we can take a look at the floor plan and section. You'll see there's a load of settings in here to determine the 2D appearance. There's then the model tab to determine the 3D appearance. We could, if necessary, even go in here and build log walls, but there's actually other tools that give us more detail we'll look at later. And then similar to the previous ones, there's listing and labelling and tags and categories, and at the very bottom the layer that this wall is going to go into. One of the things to point out about layers is each tool remembers its own last layer, so we don't have to worry too much about thinking what layer is current. We have to think about it for each tool, but not every single time. So all I do is hit OK, and then the quickest way to put the walls onto this building is just simply hold down spacebar, which gives us a shortcut to magic wand. And because there's no other interruptions to this shape, I can just click anywhere inside and it immediately finds the boundary and puts the wall down. And if I do a quick F5, we can have a look at it in 3D and see what it looks like. If I now quickly put in some doors and windows, again I can double click on the window tool to go to the settings, and this time we're presented with an Explorer type view that allows me to filter through the appropriate folders to find the style of window I'm after and then customise that to the settings I need. So if I quickly skip through, you can see there's all these different types. But what I'll do is I'll go back to basic windows. I'll stick with the most basic window we have just so we can look at the settings. So at the top we've got a preview and positioning. The preview has a number of options. Personally I find the most useful one to be this one, because if I was to do something like make the window very tall, then the preview updates and we can actually see that. Similarly, if I was to change the materials and the other settings, we would also see that take place. So what I'll do now is just quickly skip through and change a few settings, and then we'll look at the placement of them. When I've finished changing the settings, all I have to do is hit OK, and it's ready to place. Like the other elements, there are geometry methods, so we can place a window either by its centre point or its corner point. Depends on the information we have. So let's go by centre first of all, and we'll place a window in the middle of this wall. In ArchiCAD we have something called special snap points. It's actually controlled down here, and currently it's set for half across a full length element. All I need to do is put the mouse on the edge of a wall. You'll see that automatically as a little preview appears, so I can see where this window is going to be placed. So if I put it in any wall, you'll see as I highlight the wall, the preview appears. And all I'm going to do is take the mouse to the centre of this wall, and you'll see as a little marker appears where I get a tick. This means I'm exactly in the middle of the wall, and I can just click the mouse. That places the centre of the window. Click outside, and my window's in place. I could do the same over here. Find the centre, tick, click, and that's that one placed. However, we want to move that on a little bit, so what I'll do is maybe change to a corner placement method. And what I'll also do is come down to the bottom here and use this little button to switch to distance. There's also other options to divide walls into divisions, percentages, or in this case distance of 225. In fact, we'll make it block dims, we'll make it 450. So all we do is put the mouse on an edge, and you'll see it gives me all the 450 dims. So all I do is literally count in 1, 2, 3, place that there. Because it's a corner, the window could be that side or that side, so visually I've got the choice. I want it this side, and I want it to open that away. And then I can do the same from the bottom, another 3 up, and we can place that one in. So I've placed in a few more windows, but what I've done for this is use what's called multiply, and multiply gives me the option to spread elements on a particular spacing. So I've done 1800mm in this case, and what it means I can do is just literally click, come along, I can see the preview, so this last window's not going to work, so I'll stop about there, and off it goes and copies the windows in, all on exactly 1800mm increments. To just quickly round this off and give you a taster of how things work, I'm going to use the roof tool, and with this I'm just going to check that the roof's sitting on top of the current wall, the angle. We could actually have further options in here where maybe we go to 15 degrees after a couple of meters so we have a profile to the roof, but in this case I'll leave as it is. Change the overhang to maybe 300, and then you'll see there's further settings where we can look at the floor plan and section like the previous dialogues, the model tab, and similarly the listing and labelling and tags and categories. And again at the very bottom there is a layer. The one thing I didn't actually point out with the windows and doors is that they don't actually have a layer as such because they have to be part of a wall. They're controlled through what's called model view options. All I'm going to do is OK this, and then just to quickly finish off this little taster of a building, I'm going to do the same old magic wand. So I'm holding down space, take the mouse to the edge of the wall, give the mouse a click, and bingo, I have a hideous building. We can check it in 3D, and we can see how this now looks. Now those of you who've been paying close attention will have noticed there's no doors, so there's no way in or out of this building right now. And probably a lot of other little details, for example, because I'm not using any sort of particular structure to the walls, etc. The slabs actually sit on the outside face. Later on when we look at Project Hollycroft, you'll see how the slabs are actually positioned correctly within the walls, etc. But just to quickly finish off, I'm going to go to the door tool. So even though I'm in the 3D window, I can still access the same dialogues. Again, we have lots of options here for different styles of doors. But what I'll do is drop back up here and let's just have door 16. Again, it's the most basic door. Similar to Windows, different types of previews. We've got the same sort of options to set the width and the height. And I'm going to go through the settings down here just to quickly set this up and make it look slightly different. So the first thing to change is the door panel. And we'll go for this very sort of traditional residential type door panel with a locking handle, such as this. Change the height. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no layer for this. All I do is hit OK, and I'm ready to place the door. It can be by centre or corner point. I think what we'll do is put the door in the middle of this wall here. So let's change our settings back to half. All I do is put the mouse on this edge. You'll see there's a marker appears. I can click and that positions the opening, and then what I can do is use the mouse to orientate and choose what side the door opens to. So as I move inside and outside, the marker actually indicates the position of the open leaf of the door when it's in 2D. So if I open it inside to the left, click the mouse, it places the door. And if I drop back to 2D, you can see the plan's updated and we can see the door in its position here. Another thing we can take a quick look at this stage is the Navigator. The Navigator is currently set for the project map. There's more information that we need to go through here later on, but I can see at this stage, if I go to the various elevations, these have been created for me based on the geometry that's been put into the 2D and the 3D windows. And we also have a set of colour elevations, complete with brick fills, shadows and the colourings.